Harry's sincerity is the most dangerous element of all. He does not speak like a strategist. He speaks like a wounded son who believes he has finally identified the enemy. That authenticity shields the narrative from immediate dismissal. Critics may doubt Meghan's phrasing, but they hesitate with Harry, because his pain feels real. And real pain, even when misdirected, commands attention. But sincerity does not equal accuracy. Inside royal offices, advisors exchange glances they never voice aloud. They've seen this pattern before, not with Harry specifically, but with others who mistook emotional certainty for factual clarity. The monarchy has survived abdications, scandals, wars, and revolutions not because it never faltered, but because it learned patience. Harry, however, has never learned patience. His life moved from loss to responsibility to rebellion without ever stopping at reflection. In California, surrounded by affirmation and insulated from contradiction, his convictions harden. And hardened convictions are nearly impossible to reverse. Is it possible to love someone so deeply that you lose the ability to question them? And if questioning feels like betrayal, where does truth survive? The media's role, mirror or magnifier. As Meghan's implications ripple outward, the media does what it has always done, multiplies uncertainty. Headlines grow sharper. Panels grow louder. Each outlet frames the same fragments differently, depending on audience and ideology. Some cast her as a whistleblower, others as a provocateur. A few hedge carefully, afraid of legal consequences or public backlash. But none can ignore her. The ambiguity is irresistible. A direct accusation can be proven or disproven. A suggestion lingers. It invites speculation, rewards outrage, and ensures longevity. Algorithms favor mystery over clarity, controversy over resolution. And so the cycle feeds itself. What documents is she referencing? Who paid whom, and when? Why has no evidence surfaced if the claims are so serious? Every unanswered question becomes content. And yet, behind closed doors, editors admit something uncomfortable. The story no longer evolves. It circles. The same themes repeat with slightly altered phrasing. Viewership spikes, then plateaus. Fatigue sets in. Public sympathy, once automatic, becomes conditional. How many times can the same story be told before listeners stop hearing pain and start hearing pattern? The silence from London. Officially, Buckingham Palace maintains its stance. No response, no engagement, no escalation. Unofficially, that silence is doing its own work. Diplomatic circles notice the restraint. International partners recognize it as intentional. The monarchy does not defend itself because it doesn't need to, at least not yet. Institutions that have existed for centuries understand something modern figures often forget. Time favors the patient. Princess and understands this better than anyone. She does not seek vindication. She seeks containment. Every unchecked claim risks destabilizing not just family reputation, but constitutional perception. The monarchy survives on symbolic stability. When symbolism fractures, consequences extend beyond tabloids. And resists intervention. Why? Because exposure without context is chaos. But exposure with documentation is resolution. And resolution, when it arrives, must be final. The archives speak softly. Weeks pass. Then months. Inside secure rooms, aides cross-reference timelines with contracts, appearances, and correspondence. Nothing illegal emerges. Nothing scandalous enough to justify public retaliation. But something else does. Consistency fractures. Statements made in 2017 contradict recollections shared years later. Associations once dismissed as incidental recur with suspicious frequency. Media negotiations appear earlier than publicly acknowledged, not as betrayal, but as preparation. Preparation implies foresight. Foresight implies intent. And intent changes everything. Was the royal exit truly a breaking point, or a pivot? Was pain the catalyst, or the packaging? The distinction matters. Because one invites empathy. The other invites scrutiny. California pressure. Back in Montecito, the calm grows thinner. Streaming executives ask questions they didn't before. Sponsors grow cautious. Audiences react less predictably. Meghan senses the shift, not as rejection, but as resistance. And resistance is intolerable to someone who understands narrative power. She has always believed in storytelling as survival. From early acting days to royal adaptation to post-palace independence, control of perception has been her armor. But armor only works if others agree it's impenetrable. Now, cracks appear. Not in belief, but in reception. Why are people asking for proof? Why are allies hesitating? Why does attention feel colder, sharper? The answer is simple and terrifying. Ambiguity works best at the beginning. Over time, it demands substance. And substance is harder to manufacture. A marriage under narrative stress. Harry notices the tension, though he cannot name it. He sees the late nights, the clipped conversations, the urgency behind decisions that once felt intuitive. He wants to help, but helping now means aligning more aggressively, speaking louder, reinforcing the story. So he does. And each time he does, the gap between his emotional truth and emerging facts widens. Friends drift quietly away. Old confidants stop calling. His world shrinks to affirmation and loyalty tests. Does he realize it? Or does he mistake isolation for clarity? The moment of irreversibility. Every long campaign reaches a point of no return. For Meghan, it arrives subtly, not with backlash, but with exposure. A respected investigative journalist publishes a carefully sourced piece. No accusations. No condemnation. Just timelines. Just records. Just contradictions placed side by side. The public reaction is muted, but profound. Confusion replaces outrage. Doubt replaces allegiance. People don't turn against her instantly. They simply stop defending automatically. And that shift is devastating. Because once belief becomes optional, power dissolves. Silence meets suggestion. The palace still says nothing. And that, paradoxically, says everything. Princess Anne reads the coverage once, then closes the folder. The work is done. Truth has entered the room without announcement. She understands the cost. Not triumph, fatigue. Not victory, containment. There will be no redemption arc. No dramatic apology. Just gradual recalibration. History has a way of settling narratives quietly. The final question. As public interest wanes and speculation hardens into skepticism, one truth remains unresolved. Was this ever about justice? Or was it about control? And perhaps more importantly, when storytelling becomes strategy, who pays the price when the story collapses? Because institutions endure. Narratives fade. But the people inside them must live with what remains. And silence, once chosen, cannot be undone. The settled past. January 2026 was supposed to mark a quiet reset. The California sun filtered through the olive trees at Montecito, casting dappled shadows across the terrace where Meghan Markle sat reviewing partnership proposals. 5 years since the Sandringham summit. 3 since the final separation. The past, she believed, was settled. The rumors long buried, the narrative finally, firmly under control. Yet in her most private moments, a residual tension lingered in her shoulders, a slight tremor in her hands when tired. The body remembers what the mind insists is over. Across the Atlantic, in her modest sitting room at Gatcombe Park, Princess Anne set down her tea with a quiet precision that characterized her every movement. The morning report lay open before her, not the tabloids, but a confidential briefing on media patterns. Her gaze, sharp and unblinking behind practical glasses, traced the emerging pattern. History has a way of resurfacing, she thought. Especially when someone with a massive microphone decides to revisit it. That microphone belonged to a popular American commentator whose special, Royal Reckoning, The Unheard Tapes, would premiere that night. The trailer already showed previously unaired interview clips, spliced with dramatic reconstructions of palace corridors. Meghan had dismissed warnings about it. "We've moved beyond that," she told her team. "Our story is ours now." But as the sun dipped toward the Pacific, her phone chimed with a message from a family intermediary. Not the one she'd blocked, but another, more discreet number. There are pathways to private dialogue if you wish to explore them before tonight's program. No conditions. Just conversation. She showed it to Harry, who was scrolling through security updates about their upcoming trip to New York. Another trap, he said without looking up. They see an opportunity to divide us before the documentary airs. Or they're offering an olive branch, she suggested gently. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the familiar protective ferocity there. There are no olive branches from that system, Meg. Only nooses disguised as jewelry. She wanted to argue, to suggest that some bridges might still be crossed, but she recognized the set of his jaw. He saw traps where others saw bridges. This conviction had become both their armor and their isolation. 2. Cracks in the foundation. Later that evening, as they prepared for a quiet dinner, Harry experienced one of the sudden mood shifts that had become more frequent lately. One moment he was laughing at something Archie said about his school project. The next, he was standing at the window, staring at the security lights along their perimeter fence, his shoulders tense. Love. Meghan approached cautiously. They're saying we should release the emails, he said without turning. The team thinks we should show the correspondence from 2019. The ones about security arrangements. We agreed those were private. Legal. Nothing is private. The vehemence startled them both. He softened his tone. I mean, they'll keep coming unless we show everything. Unless we make them understand what it was really like. This was the constant pressure now, not from the palace, but from their own advisors. Demands for deeper revelations. New projects requiring fresh disclosures. The business of truth-telling had become their business model, and it demanded regular deposits of pain. Meghan touched his arm. We don't have to decide tonight. He covered her hand with his. I know. It's just, sometimes I wonder if we'll ever be done proving it. The irony, had he been able to see it from Princess Anne's perspective, would have been devastating. He believed he was fighting injustice, protecting his family from the same forces that had destroyed his mother. Yet he might have been the most exposed figure in the entire conflict, unaware of negotiations happening in London between palace communications officials and media lawyers, ignorant of the long-term calculations unfolding beyond his view. From her estate, Princess Anne watched the documentary trailer on her tablet. Not with anger, but with something closer to pity. A man convinced he is saving someone, unaware that the game was arranged long before he arrived on the board. The monarchy had survived worse than this. Abdications, divorces, deaths. It would survive this too, not through battle but through the patient, relentless force of continuity. 3. The moment everything changed. Megxit. To understand the fracture, one must return not just to January 8, 2020, but to the days leading up to it, to the specific quality of light in a Vancouver Island winter, where Harry and Meghan spent Christmas away from the royal family for the first time. The Canadian evergreens stood dark against gray skies as Harry paced the rented mansion's living room, phone pressed to his ear. On the line, a junior Buckingham Palace communications officer, clearly uncomfortable. The Queen expects you both at Sandringham for New Year's, sir. We've discussed this. We need space to think. There's concern about media speculation, sir. If you're not present, then let them speculate. Harry's voice cracked with frustration. Meghan, nursing 4-month-old Archie in the next room, flinched at the sound. Later, they sat together by the fire, the baby sleeping between them. We could go back, she said quietly. Play by their rules a little longer. And teach our son what? That you swallow your dignity until it chokes you. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice than a biological imperative, like jumping from a burning building. Their statement, drafted with the help of a Canadian PR consultant they'd met through a friend, was meant to be a moderate proposal. Stepping back, not stepping away. A new model. They released it at 5 p.m. UK time, ensuring it would lead the evening news on both sides of the Atlantic. Within minutes, Meghan's phone began buzzing with calls from Kensington Palace contacts. Harry silenced it. What have we done? She whispered as the notifications multiplied. What we had to, he said, but his hand trembled as he poured them both a drink. The media gave it a name almost instantly. Megxit. The term exploded across headlines, debates, satire. For some, it captured the shocking arrogance of it all. For others, it unfairly placed blame on Meghan alone, the American actress who'd stormed the castle and was now burning it down. But beyond opinion, the impact was irreversible. Palace aides who'd been sympathetic found their hands tied. Senior courtiers who might have advocated for compromise were overruled by those who saw the announcement as an act of war. What was framed as a search for peace became the starting point of a far larger conflict. Was this a spontaneous decision born of desperation, or the first public move in a longer plan? Was independence the goal, or control of the narrative? Those questions would hang in the air for years, but in that Vancouver living room, there was only the sickening realization that there was no going back. 4. The Sandringham Summit. What really happened? Publicly, the announcement triggered urgent conversations. Privately, it revealed fractures that had been forming for generations. On January 13, 2020, the Queen's private study at Sandringham felt colder than usual despite the roaring fire. Harry arrived separately from Charles and William, a small detail noted by every staff member present. The air smelled of old books, lemon polish, and tension. "Thank you for coming, Harry," the Queen said, not rising from her desk. The formality stung. Charles spoke first. "This unilateral announcement, it's not how things are done." "We tried to do it through channels for months," Harry countered. "No one listened." William remained uncharacteristically quiet, studying his brother with an expression Harry couldn't decipher. Was it anger? Disappointment? Or something closer to grief? The discussion that followed has been reconstructed from multiple accounts, but the essence remains. The institution could accommodate almost anything except public surprise. The monarchy depends on the careful management of perception, and Harry and Meghan had shattered that control. What about the half-in, half-out proposal? Harry asked toward the end. The Queen exchanged glances with Charles. "It doesn't work, Harry. One cannot be partly sovereign, or partly representative of the sovereign. And if we try, then you would be representing yourselves," Charles said quietly. "Not the crown." The distinction would become the bedrock of the coming separation. They could be royals, or they could be individuals. Not both. When Harry left hours later, the winter darkness felt absolute. He called Meghan from the car. "It's done. They're letting us go." In her voice, he heard both relief and terror. What does that mean, exactly? What it meant became clear on January 18th. No HRH titles in public life, though they could technically retain them. No royal duties. No palace funding. A review period of 12 months that everyone in that room knew was merely ceremonial. The clean break wasn't punishment. The palace would insist later. It was the only logical outcome when two fundamentally incompatible models collided. The birth of Duchess difficult. Almost immediately, as the couple began their transition, another narrative gained strength in London's corridors of power. Not in official briefings, but in the soft spaces between, over lunches at private clubs, in off-record conversations with favored journalists, in the quiet exchanges between senior aides. The phrase first appeared in a February 2020 email between communications officers, discussing how to handle questions about staff turnover at Kensington Palace. "The Duchess difficult narrative persists," one wrote. "Shall we continue non-engagement?" From there, it migrated to anonymous quotes. Working with her was challenging, a former palace aide told the Telegraph. Expectations were American. What made the label stick wasn't its originality but its utility. In 2 words, it transformed complex institutional friction into simple personality conflict. Meghan's requests for clarity on protocol became demands. Her attempts to modernize procedures became disregard for tradition. Her very American directness became aggression. Omid Scobie would later trace how the phrase moved through media ecosystems, from British broadsheets to tabloids, then to American celebrity gossip sites, then back to Britain as international reports. By the time Meghan properly addressed it in her Oprah interview, The label had hardened into assumed truth. But what if we examine the specific incidents behind the nickname? The Christmas 2018 staff party where Meghan allegedly requested vegan options, characterized as last-minute demands, but actually submitted weeks prior through proper channels. The email chains about office logistics where her questions about budget approvals were framed as challenging hierarchy. The truth, as is often the case, resided in the gap between systems. The royal household operates on unspoken understandings accumulated over centuries. Meghan operated on professional contracts and clear deliverables from her entertainment career. When these systems collided, friction was inevitable. The question is why that friction became a story about her character rather than about institutional adaptation. Supporters argue the nickname was a quiet weapon, subtle, dismissive, and effective precisely because it was so difficult to refute. How does one prove they're not difficult? By being endlessly accommodating? By never questioning? By disappearing completely? Meghan's legal team would eventually challenge several specific allegations, but in the court of public opinion, the defense often arrives too late. By 2021, even relatively sympathetic profiles included the phrase, so-called Duchess difficult, the qualifying language doing little to dilute the association. 6. The institutional response. Quiet, patient, and devastating. While public drama unfolded, the palace response focused on structure rather than emotion. This is where the story shifts from personal conflict to institutional strategy. In March 2020, as the world locked down for COVID, a small team within the Lord Chamberlain's office began what they termed the continuity audit. Their mandate: examine how the monarchy had survived previous crises and apply those lessons to the current situation. The findings were clear. Public confrontation rarely served the crown. Edward VIII's abdication was managed through careful legal frameworks, not public debate. The Diana years taught the danger of emotional warfare. The solution was always the same: outlast, don't outshout. Thus began a strategy of quiet normalization. When Harry and Meghan participated in their Netflix documentary, palace aides simply noted it in their media logs. When they launched Archewell, there were no statements. When they gave the Oprah interview, the Queen's response was famously brief: recollections may vary. This infuriated Harry, who interpreted it as dismissal. What he missed was its strategic brilliance. The palace wasn't ignoring them, it was refusing to elevate their narrative by engaging with it. Every time they released new allegations, the institution responded with the same message: we continue. We serve. We endure. By 2023, observers noted the shifting support networks. Corporate partners who'd been eager for royal-adjacent glamour began quietly distancing themselves. Media enthusiasm softened from front-page fervor to intermittent coverage. Public opinion, once sharply divided, settled into a kind of fatigued neutrality. This wasn't the dramatic collapse Harry had prepared for. It was something subtler and more devastating: irrelevance. 7. The private reckoning. For Prince Harry, this period triggered a quieter reckoning than anyone anticipated. Those close to him noticed changes. Interviews became more reflective, certainties gave way to "I believes" and "from my perspectives." The man who'd once spoken with revolutionary fervor began sounding more like someone trying to convince himself. In early 2024, during preparations for his memoir's paperback release, he spent an uncharacteristically long time reviewing a chapter about his last conversation with the Queen before her death. "Does this sound angry?" he asked his editor. "It sounds honest. But is honest the same as true?" The question hung between them. The editor, a woman who'd worked with him for 2 years, chose her words carefully. Truth is complicated when it's personal. Maybe the question isn't whether it's true, but whether it's useful. Harry closed the manuscript. What if I don't know anymore? This introspection coincided with professional recalibrations. The Archewell Foundation shifted focus from broad social justice initiatives to more targeted veterans' mental health programs, an area where Harry's authority remained unquestioned. Speaking engagements became less about royal revelations and more about service. Observers speculated about the reasons: legal advice? Financial realities? Or something more personal? Meghan, meanwhile, built her own professional identity separate from royal themes. Her American Riviera orchard brand carefully avoided palace aesthetics. Her podcasts featured fewer celebrity interviews and more conversations with women building businesses outside traditional structures. They were, in their way, rebuilding, but on foundations they now understood to be more fragile than they'd imagined. 8. The unfolding game. As January 2026 approached, Princess Anne reviewed the latest intelligence report, not from MI5, but from the palace's own media analysis unit. It showed a curious pattern: declining engagement with Sussex-related content except during moments of direct royal confrontation. The public, it seemed, was interested in the conflict, not the characters. She made a note for the next communications meeting: continue current strategy. No engagement. No escalation. Meanwhile, in Montecito, the documentary aired. It contained little new information but presented familiar allegations with fresh dramatic flair. The morning after, Meghan scanned the response metrics. High initial viewership, but social media engagement dropped sharply after the first hour. The conversation wasn't spreading. Harry entered the room, holding his phone. They're asking for comment on the documentary. Who? BBC, CNN, the usual. And the palace? Silence. That silence felt different now. Not like dismissal, but like something more final. The game, Harry was beginning to understand, wasn't about winning arguments. It was about existing on a timeline longer than any individual story. The monarchy measured its victories in decades, not news cycles. He thought about something his grandmother had said during that last Sandringham meeting, a remark he dismissed at the time. Institutions survive by knowing what to remember and what to let fade. 9. The questions that remain. This story is not just about Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, or the royal family. It is about power, perception, and the modern weaponization of storytelling. In an age where emotion travels faster than evidence, where suggestion can be as damaging as proof, who truly controls the truth? When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle released their announcement in January 2020, it did far more than dominate headlines. It revealed fundamental tensions between individual autonomy and institutional preservation. But here's the question many still ask today. Was this truly about personal freedom, or was something deeper already unfolding behind palace walls? The palace's patient, structural response suggests they understood something the couple didn't. That in the digital age, attention is the ultimate currency, and silence can devalue even the most compelling narrative. By refusing to fight on Harry and Meghan's chosen terrain, the terrain of public emotion, the institution forced them to battle not against an opponent, but against time itself. And time, as monarchies know better than most, favors continuity over revolution. As we look back now, years later, we're left with questions that still matter. Was Meghan unfairly labeled, or fairly criticized for failing to understand the institution she joined? Was Harry escaping constraint, or stepping into a different kind of prison of his own making? When he believed he was saving his family from history, was he instead ensuring they'd become a footnote in it? And in an age where perception often outweighs fact, who truly controls the story once it's released into the world? The final thought remains unchanged. Truth doesn't need applause to stand. But perhaps we should ask a harder question. How do we recognize truth when it arrives quietly, without drama, in the patient unfolding of consequences rather than the explosive revelation of secrets? Because when emotion fades and noise dies down, patterns remain. And the pattern here suggests that the most powerful stories aren't the ones told with the most passion, but the ones that become embedded in structures that outlast their tellers. So what do you think? Is the victory in telling your story, or in becoming part of a story that continues long after you're gone? And in the end, which matters more? Controlling the narrative, or understanding that no one ever truly does?